When we're talking about the kink demand curve, you'll recall from the video lecture that we have to make some assumptions here. There's going to be few firms in the market. Each firm is producing an almost identical product. All firms are rational, self-interested agents. That is, they seek to produce at the quantity where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost, presuming they're not making a loss in the long run as a result. And firm X, so we'll look at one firm in that market, produces some quantity and sells at some price that has been historically determined. So it's chosen a price quantity that it's currently operating at. And we're going to further assume that there's perfect knowledge. That is, if a firm, such as firm X, changes its price, either up or down, that rivals will know about this instantly. What's key to this whole model, of course, or the point to this whole model, is to illustrate the idea of interdependence between firms. That is, the choice of what price and quantity to produce is partly dependent upon the reactions that rivals might engage in as a result. And for this particular model, that's for all oligopoly models, for this particular model we're interested in the phenomenon where we have price and quantity stability, despite the fact that you could also have changing costs. So what explains the kink in a firm's demand curve? Well, as I said, it's explained by the interdependence of this firm's decisions and the reactions of other firms. So this is how the kink demand curve comes to life. First, we need to construct a demand curve if this firm were to increase its price from $15 to something more than that. If the firm were to increase its price, then its rivals, in reaction, will not increase their prices. And assuming that this firm is producing the same as good as all the other firms, then the demand for the firm's product, if it were to raise its price, would be highly price elastic. So we would draw something like this. An increase in price leads to a large fall in the quantity demanded. We get a very, geometrically, we get a very fairly flat kind of curve. Well, what if, on the other hand, the firm were to try and lower its price? In that case, in this story, the rivals would match that price decrease. So, as a result, the firm, in lowering its price, will only gain a few extra customers, or in other words, the demand curve will be very price inelastic. So we can see that although the price change in either direction is the same, the reaction in terms of quantity demanded is substantially different. For a rise in the price, there's a large fall in the quantity demanded. For a fall in the price, a very small increase in the quantity demanded. So that's why we have this kink in the demand curve. Now, if we then want to put in the marginal revenue curves, we'll remember that the marginal revenue curve will have double the slope of the average revenue curve, or the demand curve. So if we have the blue line, demand curve, then we have this, a marginal revenue curve that slopes downwards, double the slope of the blue average revenue line. But it stops at the kink point. and we get a discontinuous marginal revenue curve. That is a marginal revenue curve which itself has a kink in it, or a break in it. Alright, if labour were paid higher wages, the firm's marginal cost would shift. It's going to shift upwards. What would happen to the firm's chosen price and output? Well, it depends on how large the wage increase and therefore how large the increase in marginal cost will be. So we could have, for example, this situation. An increase in the marginal cost due to higher wage payments, and yet no change in the firm's rationally chosen quantity and price. Okay, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, still at the quantity of 8, and the highest price consumers are willing to pay at that quantity is $15. So despite this increase in costs, there's no change in the price and the quantity demanded. This is an unusual result because in the other models of market behaviour or firm behaviour that we've seen, an increase in costs of production is going to cause a change in the price and quantity that is produced. But we could have a different scenario. What if the increase in wages were extremely large, so that the marginal cost curves don't shift up just this amount that we've seen here, but they shift up like this? In that case, the firm's optimal output, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, will now be at a new point. That is, the firm will have moved away from the kink point in the demand curve. Okay? So that's possible too. The point of the model is traditionally to show that a change in costs results in no change in the price and quantity. However, you could say, for example, if there were a union in existence that demanded the higher wages and gained that higher wage, as long as that increase in the wage is not so large, it doesn't have any effect on price and quantity. It doesn't have any effect on output produced by the firm, and therefore presumably has no impact on employment by the firm. However, if the wage costs are much, much larger, so that you move away from the kink point, then the amount produced by the firm will decrease, and presumably that means that some workers will be fired as a result. Unless the union can negotiate extremely successfully and can keep workers employed despite the fact that less is being produced. Incidentally, just for fun, this is not required as a question, but I'll just quickly show you the geometry, the traditional geometry behind the kink demand curve. So we start off with a demand curve, our blue demand curve here, and we will draw in the marginal cost. It has double the slope, but we don't need any of this part of the average revenue curve and marginal revenue curve, because there will effectively be a different demand curve for a fall in price. This part is only for a rise in price. There we go. There's another demand curve for a fall in price, and the marginal revenue curve, double the slope. Okay, but for this, we only need that portion of the average revenue curve and marginal revenue curve that is after the kink point, that is for a fall in price. So we want to get rid of this. Okay, now once we do that, we can see we've already got our kink in our average revenue or demand curve, okay, because the other portions of these two demand curves are irrelevant, and we have a discontinuous marginal revenue curve. And traditionally what we would do is we would join them up with a horizontal line